Welcome to Solving Healthcare. I'm Kwadwo Karamantang. I'm an ICU and palliative care physician here in Ottawa and the founder of Resource Optimization Network. We are on a mission to transform healthcare in Canada. I'm going to talk with physicians, nurses, administrators, patients and their families because inefficiencies, overwork, and overcrowding affects us all. I believe it's time for a better healthcare system that's more cost-effective, dignified, and just for everyone involved.
All right, Quadcast Nation, we have a very exciting podcast today. We're on Oncology Month, breast cancer awareness, so forth, and we got not only an oncologist, a man that does preventative medicine, has a holistic approach to health. I'm talking Dr. Stephen Tucker. Welcome to the Quadcast.
Hey, Dr. K. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. First off, where are you right now and what time is it?
It's 10 minutes after 9 p.m. in Singapore.
Oh my gosh. And maybe we could start off with like how you landed in Singapore and what life is like currently.
Oh, so, that's a straightforward story after growing up in St. Louis, Missouri. And then, of course, you have an oncology multidisciplinary practice in Singapore. Didn't you do that earlier in your career?
Oh, I was thinking about the same thing, but I took a wrong turn at Albuquerque.
Yeah, it's called midlife crisis. But it was my third midlife crisis. So here's the backstory. I always wanted to be a doctor. There's some people that come to medicine later in life and some people that never know what they want to do. And you shouldn't push them to like commit, as with someone with, college age kids, like, no, don't go pursue your passion. Pursue whatever you just want to do and you'll figure it out along the way. But I always wanted to be a doctor. That's all I wanted to do. I know I said that out loud when I was 7 years old. And so that led me just straight through, U.S. education, chemistry, medical school. Always did a lot of science along the way. Thought I wanted to be a physician scientist, turned down MD, PhD opportunities at the beginning. And actually ended up at University of Missouri, Columbia, the state I grew up in. And, they just really, made it an offer you couldn't say no to. And the first 2 years were very traditional medical education, but I really was sort of missing something in a bigger picture. And I was encouraged to apply for a grant for a fellowship in nutrition at Rockefeller University in New York City. And so I left medical school after 2 years to formally study nutrition, every aspect of it, which was fat cells and neuropeptides and refeeding and satiety. And, back then it was called chromosome walking with these Zucker fatty rats. You'd have little lean rats and these huge, huge big rats. Most difficult job in science, getting two obese Zucker fatty rats to mate. There's not enough cheese and candles and music. But
the candles didn't work.
Yeah, but you get the right chow, everything happens. And so that opened my eyes to a much bigger world. And after I left the fellowship, went back to Missouri, but knew that I wanted to practice in to further train in a place where I could do sort of an integrated MD, a postdoc PhD. And so UCLA gave me that opportunity, and I went to UCLA and I did a fast track of internal medicine oncology, and then started a PhD after fellowship at UCLA in molecular biology. And after a year of that, realized that is not what I want to do, and I am not a great scientist. I'm a really good clinician, but I don't have the patience to be at the bench all the time. And so from there, I sort of transitioned into clinical research and then went into private practice, still as UCLA faculty. And then between the years 2002 and 2006, I worked with a group in the US to help build an outpatient private-based clinical research network. And the guys who started that had an opportunity in Singapore. I mean, we had gone from like 3 sites to 30 sites in 4 years.
Wow.
And the guys who started it said, do you want to go to Singapore? So I'm like, of course I do. I told my wife, we're, walking around we live next to UCLA in Westwood, California. I'm in private practice for 5 years with kids who are 6 and 8. And of course, you're going to just pick everything up and go to Singapore for 2 years. And my wife really thought, like, that's a pipe dream. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to shatter his dreams and just say no, because somewhere else in this process, somebody's going to say that's not going to work. And so it worked. And we came out here for 2 years and we loved it. I built a center in Singapore. The second year, we built a much bigger center in Shanghai. And then we hit the 2008 financial crisis. And the partners said, great idea, bad timing, come home. And my wife and I said, great idea, bad timing, we're going to stay. And I joined another group in Singapore at that time, and a multidisciplinary group. And I was with them for a few years and helped build a outpatient cancer center for them. And we flipped that to another company. And that was 2011. And I didn't want to work for the other company. So I opened my own practice, Tucker Medical. Didn't have any other special names. I'm kind of a foreigner. I just might as well use my name in the practice. And it was me and 2 nurses. And a couple of things before I tell you about where Tucker Medical went. Around that time, 2010, 2011, I had it in my head that I had to go to this place called Singularity University in Palo Alto. Have you ever heard of Singularity?
No.
So Singularity is not a real university. It's like a virtual, physical and virtual meeting space. But the whole premise is about exponential thinking. Okay? If you take 2 steps and, 2 steps and 2 steps and 2 steps, you've only gone 8. But when you go 2, 4, 8, 16, that's exponential. And most people get this when you talk about thumb drives, or the size of you have a JPEG, anyhow, that's exponential thinking, that your computing power grows, doubles every 18 months. And so I began to think both, how can exponential technologies like, everything that is tele-based or wearable tech, how could that be integrated into healthcare? And at the same time, I was at the annual oncology meetings in Chicago. And I went to a session by World Health that talked about cancer prevention. And at that time, it's about 10 years ago, the real drivers of cancer, to those who know, are tobacco, infections, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, H. pylori, HIV, chlamydia, HPV, all of that, plus the smoking. And there was a little bit of alcohol, and a little bit of lip service was being given to diet and lifestyle. But I left that session thinking about prevention, and I was walking into the hall at any of these giant conferences, and I felt like I was swimming upstream. All the docs were sort of in suits, and all the drug reps and pharma people were in suits, and everybody's going, and I don't begrudge them, but it's like everyone was finishing the day and going out for their convention steak dinner.
Right.
And I just thought, if we could get a little bit of that money into prevention, that's the only way we're going to win. Because as much as I'm an optimist and really believe that you should never say never, I have a lot of trouble conceptually curing cancer with molecularly targeted therapies. That we can spend more, and we do make advances, and people live longer and better, but I don't see all that money going to cure. Very few things we've cured in oncology, and we've done a really good job. I don't want to beat up on my colleagues, and I think the advancements exist, but if you could just prevent, that's where it all came together. So that was scale and prevention, and my own knowledge of, my knowledge of basic science, and still interest in genomics, a complete obsession with wearable technology and gadgets, from, Fitbits to, scales and sleep. And I used to do triathlons, and I anything worth doing is worth measuring, is the famous saying. And so that all synergized for me in Singapore. That story of how I got here and then how we've just built on it as a a traditional conventional medical practice that does lifestyle medicine as much as it does conventional medicine. That's sort of the long answer. I'll shut up now.
Wow. No, but I get so excited because I feel like, in the medical community, we're not exponential thinkers. We're not innovators. And I don't know what holds us back, but we've done a couple shows on how innovation needs to be well adopted. So I get super excited when I hear you talking about the ideas of using wearables, and we'll talk about continuous glucose monitors. So much of the technology is out there. And
right.
Why aren't we applying this to think about prevention, to think about optimizing, to think about personalizing approaches to health? It's out there.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Optimizing is the key, because something in medicine says, here's your glucose value and here's the range.
Mm-hmm.
And use the hemoglobin A1C, even easier. Normal A1C should be like 4.5 to 5.6. And diabetic range in the US is pre-diabetics 5.7 to 6.4. So if you have a 4.9, that's a really good score, and it's normal. And if you have a 5.6, that's also normal, but it's not as good as a 4.9. Mm-hmm. And so I ask patients all the time, if their teenagers come home and they say, "Mom, I'm taking all these courses and I got a C in every course. I'm normal." My mom would not be happy with me coming home with straight C's and saying that's normal. Straight A, straight C, doesn't matter. It's in the normal range.
Yeah.
So there's an optimal range, and that can be personalized.
Mm-hmm.
That can be objectified, and it can be personalized. And you need data for that.
100%. And so maybe we could talk about Tucker Medical, exactly what you guys are able to do, because I think that's some sexy ass shit. But also, you got an appreciation with all of your training about metabolic health, and we're talking the cancer today. And what are the links that you've seen in your career? Why should we care?
So I like to joke, I like to tease that I dropped out of medical school to do this fellowship. I didn't really drop out, but when I went to Rockefeller, it was pretty intense about energy metabolism and human behavior. That's really the formal sort of title of the fellowship. And the simple fact is, I tell people everything I learned was wrong. And it was tattooed on my brain that it was energy in, energy out. It was the caloric hypothesis of obesity, and it was wrong. It really was wrong. So I think that calories do matter. You can't ignore the concept of the calorie, but the reason that energy in, energy out fails is very simple. If one believes that, I've got a basal metabolic rate of 3,000 and I want to lose weight, so I put myself on 2,000 a day for 3 months, that's going to be a 90,000 calorie deficit that can convert into so many kilos of weight, and it should just work. If you control everything, if you could have a strict environment, it should just work. And the reality is it doesn't work, because if you put me on a 2,000 calorie meal every day, I would ask, does it matter if it's 2,000 calories, of, wild caught salmon, or 2,000 calories of olive oil, or 2,000 calories of sugar, or 2,000 calories of kerosene, right? And so it's not the calories that matter as much as the source of the calories. And we're a hormonal metabolic hot mess that when you put stuff in us, we respond. It's not just going to the station and filling up with petrol. You have to look at the source of the energy, and that's what drives everything. So that was wrong. When did my switch flip? I have to credit Bob Lustig and Gary Taubes, just good public writing about this impending pandemic of obesity and diabetes. And when you really spend the time to look at the alternative hypothesis, the insulin hypothesis, it makes a lot of sense. And you begin to see, you start to connect the dots. And those dots would be, my worldview became based on that. We have a pandemic of obesity and diabetes, of overweight and pre-diabetes. For the purpose of discussion, I don't even consider those to be diseases. I consider those to be outcomes from behavior. Those outcomes drive the majority of heart disease, stroke, and cancer, along with Alzheimer's, a lot of autoimmune disease, fatty liver, of course. And people don't really die of obesity. They die of the complications of obesity. And so that intermediate step, and then that worldview says, all right, if most of us, and for everything that I would say, I'm going to talk sort of about the 80-20 principle. There are exceptions, right? Yeah, there's exceptions. This is not a global view, but it is a general view. I mean, I'll talk about, we can talk about genetics and cancer and lifestyle and cancer. There's always some extremes. But if we talk about 80% of the problem, then what we're saying is, for most people, they should be a lean phenotype, or at least not an obesogenic phenotype. And how do my joke is, there are 10,000 books written on how to lose weight, but there's only one book on how to get fat. And you have a copy. Did you know that? It's called right? Medical Physiology, right? Medical Physiology tells you that the prime driver of creation of fat is insulin. So if insulin's driving fat, what's driving insulin? Blood glucose. If blood glucose is elevated, what's driving that? Predominantly processed food and hyper-processed food, carbohydrates, fruits, juices, excess sugar, added sugar. I think there's a strong role to discuss sleep and circadian disruption, as well as the role of exercise. There are a lot of ways to manipulate insulin. And we advocate not for a low carb or low glucose lifestyle. We advocate for a low insulin lifestyle.
Yes.
And so that's really what that worldview is. And to me, that's the short form from reading all three of Gary's books or Jason's books or Lustig's books. Everyone out there is writing these great books and experiences, collections of, real case series to anecdotes. And what they're pointing out is that process drives the disease that the author is interested in. Mm. If it's an Alzheimer's book, they're going to get back to a low carb diet. If it's a cancer book, it's going to get back to a low carb diet. I don't care if you're a vegetarian or a carnivore. I don't care if you're, one meal a day or fasting for 1, 3, 7 days. I don't care what name you put on your diet. If it gives you success by reducing your body fat and reducing your insulin, you're on the right diet for you. That's the way to look at it, in my opinion.
Wow. No, but it's the key theme there, though, is how insulin is driving a lot of disease, a lot of inflammation and insulin resistance. And so just to be as blunt as possible, like as an oncologist, you're seeing direct ties to patients either with worsening outcomes or what do you see on the front lines?
Before you get to the front lines, you sort of start with the population level.
Sure.
And obesity is now tagged or is either or about to become the number one cause of preventable cancer.
Wow.
And so, how does obesity do it? It's through insulin and chronic inflammation. In our own experience in the office, we take a personalized approach for patients. We take them through what I would call standard therapy, conventional therapy, guidelines-based, international US-style treatment. For example, stage 1, 2, 3 breast cancer, you're going to come in, the story is always the same. I felt a lump, I had a mammogram, I got a biopsy, a surgeon, they did surgery, and now I'm here to make sure it doesn't come back. And in those stage 1, 2, 3 patients, realize that's a high-risk group where you could begin to study these ideas. And what we give them is the appropriate chemotherapy, hormone therapy, targeted therapy, straight out of the guidelines. And you, if you do that today, following US guidelines, you should have your 5-year cure rate for stage 1 and 2 should be 98, 99%, basically. You should have only 1% relapse, stage 1 and 2, if you follow the guidelines in the US. For stage 3, it's more like a 85% cure rate, so a 15% fail rate. We offer all of our patients from the beginning and along their treatment course, because you usually can't get someone in the throes of chemotherapy to change their diet. They want to, but they might be told by their best friend, you need to do the banana diet, or you need to eat Himalayan salt, or, there's just a lot going on because you got to deal with the word cancer. And if you're told you have cancer, you likely now have post-traumatic stress disorder. That it just changes your worldview. It's like stepping on a mine. It's a frightful thing that is really, really impossible to erase for many. But when the time is right, we start to talk to the patient about how diet impacts risk of cancer, and how we always remind them, you've already seen the surgeons, you're cured, okay? Statistically, we understand 1% fail rate or something, but I would choose to view you as being cured, and you're taking all of this extra medicine and extra effort as an insurance policy. Now, if you go to those stage 3 women, it's 85% are cured, taking all the right medicines, which means if you take it, the patient will come in and say, is there anything else I can do? And when they're ready for that, when they say that, the answer is yes, there's a lot you can do. That if we believe that reducing alcohol and smoking and getting to a lean body weight and insulin is a bad thing for ever getting cancer in the first place, why don't we try doing this with you, because you're at higher risk than the rest of the population because you already had cancer once. It is so much easier. I mean, if a 45-year-old obese gentleman walks into my office, he's a banker, a lawyer, a CEO type. It's like, I just don't feel good anymore. I feel tired. I'm overweight. I have impotence. I don't make decisions well. So what's wrong? And I'm like, you got to change your diet. And they're like, oh, can't you just give me drugs? They're trying to talk to people who are overweight, obese, who haven't kind of bottomed out. Cancer is metabolically bottoming out for some people, so that they're ready to make that change.
They're motivated.
But when you talk to people who've had cancer, it's preaching to the choir. They're like, what else can I do? They're like, okay, I'll change my diet. What else can I do? Okay, I'll meditate. What else can I do? I'll take these supplements. What else can I do? I'll take metformin. They are, they're willing to do a lot to make sure this thing doesn't come back. And we have to guide them about the pros and cons of all of these different post-treatment interventions that not only reduce the risk of cancer coming back, but are actually reducing the risk of any chronic disease. I'm trying to do an end around on, I want to, reduce obesity and diabetes in the world. And I've just started by doing it in patients with a history of breast cancer, because they have the same, 88% of North America is obese, overweight, diabetic, or pre-diabetic.
Poor metabolic
health. And that would mirror the same people who are getting breast and prostate cancer. And so I'm going to tackle overall metabolic health and, wellness, whatever that means, by doing it in this high-risk group of people who are highly motivated. That's the key. Yeah.
And what do you see? And you know what I mean? They're highly motivated, and are you seeing results? Are they coming back saying, I feel like shit, or you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. No, we see results. We measure results in a few different ways. Quite objectively, we keep a running database of breast cancer patients, stage 1 through 3, who I have taken care of from diagnosis to date. Singapore gets a lot of medical travelers. So if you got half your treatment in the Philippines and then came to me, you're not in the database. People that I know from diagnosis going forward. And in that database, I have 103 women so far, stage 1 through 3, with a median follow-up of about 5.5 years. And we have no relapses, first of all, full stop. None of them stage 1 through 3. But as I told you, stage 1 and 2, you shouldn't really have any relapses, 1%, even with triple negative breast cancer and, more aggressive forms. But we have, and in the US, 2/3 of patients present with stage 1, 2, and I think about 20% stage 3. But in my practice in Asia, where there's fewer mammograms and people have less access to care, it's 50-50. So about 51 of our patients in the database are stage 3, and none of them have relapsed either. So, I think bad news could strike any day. I knock wood, but so far, not having a single breast cancer relapse in 10 years, I think it's because of the way we personalize the post-treatment care, so that it's been emphasized what's really important, not the process, not the name. It's not the so-and-so diet. It's whatever you're doing, measure your insulin, get some data. Make sure that your belief system is giving you the outcome you want in that sense. And the other way we measure it, so that's a pretty, standard medical case series measurement. The other way we measure it is the number of referrals. Because once the patients understand this, and my interest in doing primary care for prevention of all chronic disease, if my patient has breast cancer at 40, now her older sister is at higher risk for breast cancer by definition. And so we often end up doing secondary prevention in the patients and primary prevention in their siblings and parents and children. And we encourage it because if you're going to change to a low-carb lifestyle, it's better to do it as a team than to be sort of, put as an outcast. If the husband and, if the whole family's going low-carb, it's a whole lot easier. So I would say that that's one of the measures of success as well. And probably a third measure, because we do this with prostate cancer all day long. And prostate cancer, we don't use as much chemo, but prostate cancer and heart disease are like symptoms and signs for each other. They run hand in hand due to the same inflammation insulin pathway, again, 80%. And so despite the fact that we may be providing hormone blockade, castrating therapy for men with prostate cancer for 1 year or less, they come out of that in better shape than they started, because now it's that wake up call. Once you start getting guys to bodybuild and you start getting them to run and walk and, eat less carbs and drink less alcohol, you turn these guys into, Greek gods, and they're like, they're just so happy that they have this new leash on life. It's pretty amazing.
I'm getting really excited, Stephen, because what I like about the approach to it and what you said is how much of an amplifier some of this is. Like that element of primary prevention, right? Like the fact that person's sister is seeing the results, their family seeing the results, there's buy-in. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because now in our culture, we don't talk about this enough. I don't know what it is. We're in a heightened pandemic when metabolic health is clearly, it is screaming that this is an important element of outcomes. And we still don't talk about this. So whatever we can do to amplify this message, as you said, talk about getting people like prevention is the money, is the key. You know what I'm saying?
So I think one of the big drivers to create that human megaphone is leveraging patients. Let me take you a step back. You ever read an Amazon review?
Yeah, 100%.
You ever written one?
Almost never.
Right. okay, who are these people writing the reviews? Right? I mean, and some of them are really good. I mean, that's, I write on Quora sometimes and like to give back, but it's like, wow. Or people giving advice, I can't get my AirPods to connect to my MacBook, and you go, and there's like people, and you get points and you get stars, right? You become like a brigadier general of advice, of reviews on Amazon. Okay. Trusted, verified reviewer. We can do the same with patients by helping them understand their skills at advocacy, that encouraging them to share their stories, to share what they know, and support them, to say, to teach them that this is not rocket science. You do not need a medical degree to give people common sense. And so, but what the layperson needs is to know that we have their back, and that, when they're, what's complicated, what's not complicated, when you should sort of, if you don't know what's going on, just say, you should, here's the way I see it, but Dr. Tucker or one of the other doctors or his nurses or his nutritionist, any of them, shoot them an email. Yeah, and it's no problem. But I have a lot of patients that have become advocates, and some patients who've actually joined our practice as coaches. So, and I have always loved, and this more people should do this. Once you really have a successful patient and a trusted patient, somebody who's motivated, there's people who are, smart about how they communicate. They're natural communicators. And what you do is you buddy them up with newly diagnosed patients.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I'll give you an example. I had this is just really brings joy to my face. Patient I'm taking care of for 5 years. She's very young, had breast cancer in her 30s, kind of an aggressive breast cancer. I didn't treat her for the first year. She lived in another country. She got all the right treatments, got on hormone therapy, moved to Singapore, did 2+ years of her hormone therapy, and then said, we banked all these eggs and embryos, and can I stop my hormones and have a baby? And I said, absolutely. There's great literature and support for this. We'll get everybody on board. And she delivered just a beautiful baby and went right back on her hormone therapy, and then continued for a total of 5 years of standard hormone therapy. And she was in my office about a month ago and wanted to ask, could she stop the hormone therapy? She's still got a bunch of embryos left over. I want to do it again. And, now she's still young. And I'm like, by all means. Now, 1 hour before, I saw a new patient with breast cancer who was in the exact same situation. And was seeing me as a second opinion, because the first two oncologists that she saw said, don't even bother. You don't have enough eggs or embryos. You should just do your chemo. You're 40. Don't even think about it. Your life is at risk. And she came to me and I said, nope, you can do this. It's going to take, not have the baby, but in this case, it was, egg stimulation. It was going to take 4 weeks. It's going to delay us. But I said, you can do this. This is fine. You won't be worse than somebody who had a post-op infection and couldn't do chemo right away. And so we're giving her that advice. But those two women in the office on the same day, and I hooked them up, not just let the new patient know I'm supportive, but I'm supportive, and here's a shining example of how you can do it.
Wow.
And connecting people like that, you can do it with breast cancer, with weight loss, with running your first marathon. You get a shadow, a buddy, somebody who's been there, that, that's not a doctor and not part of the system. I think that's invaluable. That makes your megaphone.
That is I was getting so excited hearing about this too, because, we've done a couple shows. Like one of our most popular shows actually was with a doc that he himself seeing the impact of metabolic health on COVID patients, end up losing 30 pounds. And this just resonated so much with people. And that light bulb came off. It's like, hey, man, when people can be it's a relatable story. When that patient can tell you what the experience was and know the intricacies of what it will take to get you better, how powerful is that? Not get past the white coat, you should do this, but my doctor told me to do this. Whereas you got that relatable cat that's willing to like connect with you. You get that community sense too. It's brilliant.
Yes.
It's brilliant.
No, absolutely. So I love connecting people, and I know you like innovation, but in a sense, there's a better way to get to success quickly. And I would say it's integration. I don't have to go invent a way to communicate to patients. I just need to integrate, patients with each other and make communities, and that's really, it's very, it's very touchy-feely. It's very holistic. And I when I say that, I always want to follow that up with, but I like genetics and radiation and drugs, that I'm of two minds. There's the sciencey technology bit, but at the end of the day, it's community, it's support. We spoke about it's hope, and it's being true to yourself. Whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, don't let somebody change your personality for a better outcome. You embrace your personality. We don't want to create new fights for individuals. That always makes, as an aside, somebody says, my daughter comes in and says, my dad's got a bad attitude. Tell him he should be more positive. I'm like, no, he can own it. He's already changing his diet for you, and he's already doing this. If he wants to be a curmudgeon, let him be a curmudgeon. He doesn't need more things to fight. That's for sure.
But what I'm thinking though, Stephen, is like you're saying, like it's the softer stuff, but I bet you, like you and I have both seen the patients that have like, I don't have the studies to prove this, but have that more authentic approach, that have that sense of community, that have that positivity, they do better. And I bet you, if you were to track their glucose, like if you did a continuous glucose monitoring with them, or because of like how it's related to stress, I bet you we'd even see some biological impacts. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Without question. So I think, there's two things there, and I want to come back to, you hold on to that. We're going to talk about, I guess, personality, resilience, and glucose response. And then, but in a bigger picture, there's some famous studies, I believe from Mayo Clinic in, I think even in the 60s, where people were assessed with the tools of the day for personalities and personality traits of optimism or pessimism. And they followed these people for something like 30 years. And optimists live longer than pessimists. Okay? It's about a 3-year gain, but it was very clear. Now, there's dual interpretations there, because is it that everyone's supposed to live the length of a pessimist life, but optimists get 3 years? Or is everyone supposed to live the optimist life and pessimists cut off 3 years?
Yeah.
Right? But there is a difference. And there's also studies to look at, and this does get back to the success and probably some of the responses. There are other studies in psychology where individuals have been interviewed after they've lost, I think it was an arm or a leg. It might have been vision or sight also, but obviously a traumatic accident. And they're interviewed, and people who win the lottery win like more than $1 million. And so they interview these people sort of, when it happens and a couple of years later. And whether you win the lottery or lose your arm, equal numbers of people say it was the best thing that ever happened to them. And equal numbers say it was the worst thing that ever happened to them. And so that's mindset, right?
Oh.
And so I do think that where it plays a role is in the stress response, because if insulin is the villain in the story, what we're talking about is the degree of a fight or flight response. Because I said, food is a big driver of glucose, which is a driver of insulin, but fight or flight, you get this, you're walking down the road and there's a cobra and a scorpion and a tiger all waiting for you. And you're like, I got to get out of here. Or I'm going to fight. No matter what happens, you're going to crank out a ton of adrenaline and cortisol, and that's going to release a lot of glucose. And then whether you fight or not, you're going to have to dispose of the glucose and your insulin will go up. And so the stress response, if you're under chronic stress, you're going to have excessive glucose and excessive adrenal hormones and higher levels of cortisol, which are always going to raise blood glucose. And then you get into the vicious cycle. Let's say the modern, fight or flight, chronic stress is my, if you have a child with leukemia and it's an 18-month battle, you're having a tax audit, you're having a divorce. And so your sleep is disrupted, you're anxious or worried for good things or bad things. Getting married is just as stressful as getting divorced. Buying a home is just as stressful as, selling a home. So stress ignores the good or the bad. When markets crash, if you're an investor, that's bad news. But when they crash, if you've been shorting everything, it's good news. So, the action doesn't matter. It's the response. And so when you have all those hormones going up, you set off the vicious cycle that starts to create obesity. Because of the stress, you might reach for, a bag of chips, an extra beer, some, easy comfort food. That's going to change your dopamine, neuropeptide, galanine, leptin and ghrelin. And you start getting into this vicious cycle where now everything is changing because of these chronic stress responses. But to really get deeper, what do you think about the microbiome? Do you think I wonder how much of that from childhood influences stress responses?
I got to tell you. Sorry to interrupt. I got, the more I learn about the microbiome, the more fascinating it is. And the more I think we need to have a deeper appreciation and knowledge for what it all means. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow.
No, but so there's an article, I'll find the title for it, but the short of it was recently, breast cancer outcomes associated with microbiome, sort of phenotype and like bad dreams, anxiety about recurrence. So it's tying the microbiome and the glucose response and one of the subterms in the microbiome, you're going to love this one, the psychobiome, how the microbiome affects your brain, and there's a direct connection between in the gut-brain axis. The vagus nerve, we now know, literally can conduct bacteria neuropeptides from the brain to the stomach. Wow. And so I do think that this stress response, we see it in patients. Positivity helps, and positivity comes from people, I'll call it authority, but people that the patient respects who support the patient. Mm-hmm. When the patient tells me, doc, I'm going to do the diet, this, and the reason I think I'm doing great is really, it's not the diet or the drugs, it's prayer. That the doctor, the patient comes in and says, I believe that, prayer is what's getting me through this. And there might be a lot of doctors out there in the world who will just smile. And a lot of doctors sometimes will say, there's no evidence. There's been no randomized controlled trial of prayer compared to, disdain on the outcomes in breast cancer. But if you tell the patient, if you're supportive of the patient, that to say, I don't know the impact of prayer myself, but it sounds like it's really working for you. Being positive about the efforts the patient takes doubles the value of the effort itself. Because if I say prayer is stupid, then the patient's going to be anxious and worried and, troubled and conflicted, and that's not helping anyone. Mm. So I think that you need to be able to listen to the patient and be supportive to the degree, as long as something's not harming the patient. that you obviously know of. That's really the key. But you still can phrase it in a supportive way, such as, I'm glad you've been proactive in doing more things to reduce your risk.
Exactly. Like, why not promote that positive mindset? You know, like the patients are going through enough already. As you mentioned, the diagnosis of cancer alone can give you some PTSD, you know, and to have that kind of support from your doc, from your care team to say, hey, you know what, you think this might work? It's not going to cause harm as far as you could see. Why not? Why not have that little sense of hope?
Or certainly be neutral. But, you know, and this has been one of the drivers of the practice, is that when for years, oncology patients will ask their doctor about a diet, and the doctor will say, there's no evidence that diet is going to impact, you know, your outcome, that they just, you know, dismiss it out of hand. And that's not true. You know how doctors love to say there's no evidence from randomized clinical trials, or just say there's no evidence without teaching the patient there are levels of evidence. Right? Yeah. And so you can be supportive by not being negative. Right. I think that's really important to get across too.
Right, and it brings to your point too a little bit about, you know, the nutrition, like the trials or the studies that are showing benefits. Like, a lot of these are tough to do. There hasn't been a ton of RCTs, but you always got to ask yourself, you know, we got to, evidence has to start from somewhere. And I do hope that, you know, with this more awareness of how diet can affect outcomes, like this is something we'll be doing more of.
Did we when you were doing some research and when we were emailing, did you come across any of the information about fasting and cancer treatment?
This has also got me excited. No, this is on the agenda, my friend. Like, let's jump on it. Because we've been doing like, we had Jason Fung on the show too about the benefits of fasting, and Megan Ramos, and you know, I've personally been doing it for about 3 years, and but the idea of it affecting cancer outcomes is sexy AF. So Stephen, maybe we'll talk about that.
It's incredible, absolutely incredible stuff. So fasting. You have to go back to the sort of the basics of why insulin and glucose are bad in cancer. And that starts off with this, you know, famous scientist, Dr. Warburg, Otto Warburg, who was a biochemist and got a Nobel Prize in 1925 for energy metabolism. And whenever you hear energy metabolism, dear listener, we're talking about the mitochondria. So the powerhouse inside the cell. You know, a cell is like a balloon that's got a smaller balloon inside filled with DNA, and even smaller balloons inside. They're called mitochondria, which generate energy. And the mitochondria might actually be really old eons old bacteria that got fused into these cells and sort of symbiotic. But that's where we make energy to do stuff, to do anything. And so what Warburg observed, what's called the Warburg effect, is that cancer cells always make energy in a very ineffective, polluted kind of way. So that's called, you know, through glycolysis. That Warburg said that cells make energy, cancer cells make energy through glycolysis. Healthy cells always make it through something called oxidative phosphorylation. We consider that to be very energy efficient, and you get a lot of energy that way. But whether you have oxygen or not, Warburg saw that cancer cells were making energy from glycolysis. Now, Warburg said with that observation, he hypothesized that the primary cause of cancer was this change in cellular energy metabolism, and that everything else, carcinogens and infections and genetics, were secondary causes to cancer. But the first harm, the first, you know, foul was going to be this change in energy metabolism, that the cells are kind of addicted to glucose and they're pretty inefficient. Now, bring that forward to fasting. Cancer cells have this high metabolism and inflexibility when it comes to source of energy. But healthy cells are much more metabolically flexible. That a healthy cell has when presented with a stress, can say a stress like no glucose around, fasting for 24, 48 hours, that the healthy cell will you slow its growth rate, it'll adapt. So when you fast, what happens is cancer cells, they don't change. They just keep running at a high speed while the healthy cells slow down. They go into a protective mode. They go into a maintenance and a repair mode. They're adaptive. So now you've got these two groups that are, one is responding, adapting healthy, and one is just like going full tilt. And then you throw the chemotherapy in. So a second hit. So the healthy cells are actually protected because they're not replicating so much, and chemotherapy doesn't intertwine and affect them. You get less DNA damage and more what's called oxidative stress. But the cancer cells, they're still moving at high speed. They're unstable because they haven't had their glucose for 24 hours. And then you hit them with chemotherapy and you get even more DNA damage and oxidative stress, more benefit, what doctors call more efficacy. Now, that's the philosophy. And that's been studied, very well. Probably the key guy for so much of this is a guy named Walter Longo out of USC. And he's looked at this as these fasting paradigms, traditional fasting, just what would be considered water fast, but also something called a fasting mimicking diet, or FMD. But either way, what Longo and his clinical partner, Tanya Dorf, a medical oncologist who I used to work with for a long time. Tanya's an amazing oncologist. But they were able to do the studies in people to show that fasting was safe. And one of the first studies, which was straight fasting, took chemotherapy patients and they had them fast for up, 24 to 48 hours before the chemo and up to 24 hours after the chemo. Then they, and so that was great. We've been using that. But I'll tell you what really, shook me, what is so amazing, out of all these reports about the safety of fasting during chemotherapy, there was a report earlier this year that the fasting mimicking diet, in addition to chemotherapy and breast cancer, provided better clinical results.
Wow.
And the way that this was done is that these were women who had tumors in their breast and got chemotherapy before surgery. So we kind of know when we give this neoadjuvant chemo, we can see the tumor shrink or not shrink. And that helps us, with prognosis and futuristic, decision making. Half the patients did the fasting mimicking diet and half the patients did a standard diet. There's about 130 people, women with breast cancer, age 50, all stages 2 and 3, and they got hard chemo, real chemo. Okay. And the goal was to look at evaluate the diet, the fasting on toxicity and benefit as measured by tumor response. And the simple answer is if you followed the diet, you were significantly more likely to have all of your tumor disappear. A pathological complete response, which is highly predictive of long-term cure. Mm-hmm. Statistically, that was the odds ratio for a statistician. You're 4 times more likely to have your tumor disappear with the fasting mimicking diet in this study than if you didn't. I mean, that was just, to me, that's enough. And so we've actually been incorporating fasting and variations on fasting, whether it's FMD or straight fasting, whether it's weekly or every 3-week fasting with chemo. We've incorporated that now for about 2 years. Mm-hmm. And all I could say is that anecdotally, we see We see a lot less toxicity from chemo. We are seeing good pathologic responses in the breast cancer patients who get neoadjuvant chemotherapy. But I'll tell you what's most amazing, and based on this last paper, you can get rid of high-dose steroids before chemotherapy when you do the fasting mimicking diet. You have to sort of make sure that the patient does well in the first cycle, but as long as they do well in the first cycle, you can remove the steroids. And, we use 20 milligrams of dexamethasone for the lay audience. That is a huge slug of steroids. It's a whiskey bottle of steroids that you would have to take, either weekly or every 3 weeks. And that's going to raise your glucose. It's going to change all of your metabolic health.
Your mood.
So getting rid of the steroids, mood, weight gain, diabetes, obesity, all of that. Yeah. So fasting works.
Oh, wow.
And this is something we have data for. That's the beauty. We really have data for this.
Yes.
It's cool.
This is exciting. So not only, initially they're showing safety in terms of the having that approach that there's no negative sequelae.
Less negative, less toxicity.
Yeah. And so wow, why not? From what I'm hearing from you, and I haven't dove into the papers, but it doesn't seem like there's if a patient's willing, there's an obvious downside to them trying. Just another thing in the arsenal,
Right. And it doesn't always have to be precisely like Dr. Longo's FMD. It could easily be, even if you can do 12 hours before and 12 hours after, we support you, we push you, we have a team, we have a bunch of nutritionists, our nurses. We've all played with fasting in the office in the sense of we wouldn't push someone to offer someone a lifestyle intervention that we haven't road tested ourselves.
Right.
That said, I haven't volunteered for chemotherapy, but I've definitely done the fasting.
Wow.
And the flip side's also, there's data for the flip side. Diabetics who have poorly controlled glucose through chemotherapy are almost never going to get a pathologic complete response. So there was a second paper this year that on the effect of diabetes and fasting glucose on neoadjuvant breast cancer. And the flip result was seen. Those with the highest glucose, 0 pathologic remissions.
Jesus Christ. This is what I'm saying. This stuff needs to be really amplified, because it's, once again, there are interventions that are not costly. They are relatively simple and could have a lot of bang for your buck. And this might be a tough question, Stephen, but are you seeing anything also related not only to fasting, but any dietary, specific diets, you choose, whether it's carnivore, plant-based, whether it's, why am I brain farting? So I'm going to, why am I?
We can come up with more.
Sorry, I'll ask the question again.
We do the zone. We do the Mediterranean.
I don't know why I brain farted there.
There's so many.
Did I forget to say keto? That's what I was going to say. Keto. Yeah,
keto.
Keto.
Modified keto, dirty keto, bulletproof.
Yeah,
right?
There's
a million.
Was there any obvious evidence that comes to mind?
I don't think so for a diet.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting. It comes up a lot because there are specific elements of diets that are hot buttons for people. And whether it's, you believe it or not, you can talk to, so if you read, can't remember his name, but Colin Campbell, the China study, which says, basically is a horrible study with, so many variables, so many possible outcomes that it's generally not trustworthy. But people will point out certain elements of a diet based on some study. For example, should you eat beef, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, patients come in and patients get things confused. Doctors get things confused because they think, oh, if I'm going on the keto diet, I better go eat a cow. I'm like, nowhere in the keto diet does it say you have to eat beef, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. You don't. If you're a colon cancer patient, you're a little bit worried about, red meat. Okay, you can be keto with fish and chicken, right?
Mhm.
So people get hot buttons and they, I'm sure you see this. A hot button is fruit. Shouldn't we be having a lot of fruit?
Yeah.
No, fruit is sugar, and it's not the same fruit my grandparents had. This stuff is genetically crossed. If you ever go to a farmer's market and buy heirloom tomatoes?
No, but
Okay.
I'll be honest. I don't even know what that even means. But yeah.
So heirloom tomatoes. Heirloom tomatoes are funny looking tomatoes. They're beautiful, different colors with sort of white stripes in them. They're very tasty. And people think, oh, I went to the organic farmer's market and I bought these beautiful heirloom tomatoes. And I'm like, that is like buying the Labradoodle Chihuahua, breeding, freak. That heirloom tomatoes don't grow in nature. Okay. This is a genetic cross. And it's and I'm not saying, and that's what happens is because then people say like, well, are tomatoes good? Like, tomatoes are not good or bad. Cheeseburgers are not good or bad, but a diet that is filled with only cheeseburgers is not good for you. That's really, and even with that statement, I would caveat it. Whatever diet gives you solid numbers, low insulin, low glucose, normal liver enzymes, normal ferritin, normal hormones, whatever, and assuming you're lean, that, not skinny, but that you don't have, excess body fat, that's the diet that's good for you.
Oh my God.
If you feel like you can eat Doritos and Pringles all day long and be healthy, show me the money. That's all I would say.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I'm still caught up on especially with COVID puppies, the Labradoodle Chihuahua hybrid.
Yeah. What are you gonna?
I heard of a double doodle the other day, or something like that. Double doodle. I'm getting my dogs mixed up, but I have no idea what that means.
Before we had bulldogs. I love bulldogs, and that's there's still. It's just like, there's not a lot of naturalness to these guys, as cute as they are.
Yeah, I do hear you. I do think they're cute. But it's great what you're saying too, and we try and emphasize as much as possible as nothing should be cookie cutter. It's personalized. It should be with the result of having good metabolic profile. For example, good glucose index, and so the case for continuous glucose monitor, or any evaluation for metabolic health that you like. We're doing a show with NutriSense, and they make the case for why at some point in life it's worth having continuous glucose monitored. And do you guys routinely use them in your practice, for example?
All day long, constantly. We love continuous glucose monitors, because they are, in some ways they are the wearable tracker, the Garmin, Fitbit, Polar, Samsung for metabolism. And one of the things about it is, it's great for a diabetic to help them understand their diet and drugs and help reverse diabetes and maybe get them off insulin, which we do. But I still think the biggest use case is in non-diabetics, in healthy adults with mild to moderate metabolic dysfunction, because there is no hiding from a glucose meter that your glucose meter, the results from your glucose meter are the what do I want? My turn for the brain fart. The trackers. Just from the sky.
GPS.
Yeah, GPS. Yeah, glucose meters. Glucose meters are GPS for your diet.
Yeah.
That's really what it is, because you might think you're one place or another, but the reality is the glucose meter doesn't lie. And it's funny because you really want to go into invasive tech. Your glucose meter and your phone are in the same place. Your credit card's in the same place. There is no hiding from that. Well, you spent $8.50 at this location at 1 p.m., that's the location of a McDonald's, and your glucose meter went up, right? You're like, you're busted. You are just busted. There is no snacking. There is no hiding snacking. You can't hide from your, if you have a girlfriend, you can't hide from her with a GPS any more than you can hide from your dietitian with a glucose meter. The glucose meter tells everyone what they're doing. It's so easy to use. We use the Libre as the most common one. I've used the Medtronic device. I've used the Dexcom device. All of them are going to continue to get less expensive, more accurate, more precise, and more personalized. And everyone's different. That what you might learn is if you have a bowl of rice and I have a bowl of rice, we might have two very different glucose responses. And that actually gets into something called a glucotype. So, and that may be directly related to your microbiome. So which bacteria help you digest carbs, fat, protein, the balance between those bacteria. And I don't think that people need to wear these glucose meters forever. And people will criticize, like, having a Fitbit or a wearable. They'll say, oh, this was pointless. I bought it and I put it in my sock drawer after 2 months. But I would argue that most people who wear a Fitbit for a month thought that walking 5,000 steps or 10,000 steps took so much effort. And then when they had the device on, they realized the actual effort required. So you learn something. You don't have to track all the time, but you need to learn what is required to walk 10,000 steps. And I think if you just wear the glucose meter for 2 weeks and eat your, I would tell patients, wear the glucose meter and go eat anything you want. Live your life, enjoy, eat, ad lib, everything. And they will see the ups and the downs and the craziness of their glucose. Then in the second week, we tell them, like, fast for 24 hours, break your fast with oatmeal, have a meal of scrambled eggs and bacon and salmon, black coffee, but no no breads, no carbs, no juice, and see the difference in your glucose response. It's really amazing. And for the patients with diabetes, I use in one of my talks, we had a patient with metastatic breast cancer last year who was also newly diagnosed florid, out of control diabetes at the same time. And during the first 6 months of her chemotherapy, the chemo, the fasting, and the diabetes reversal plan, we reversed her diabetes. She did the fasting, and at 6 months, she was in complete remission.
Wow.
From metastatic breast cancer. It was absolutely an awesome case.
Wow.
So the glucose meter is here to stay, for sure.
As you mentioned, Stephen, like, this is, you really want to get down to personalizing someone's health. You want to know what sugars impact you more, what and the other thing about it too is how you're going to feel too, right? Like, if you know that, you could see that what you ate had that spike up and down, and then you also felt like crap in the afternoon, wanted a nap, wanted that double espresso from Starbucks, right. I think there's a lot to be said about that. And for me too, I would love to see the impact of, hey man, I did that resistance training that day. Hey, I slept like crap the night before. Like, what is that doing to my my markers?
I'll tell you, so here's my favorite tools: glucose meter, continuous glucose meter. I don't know if we're gonna have video, but Oura Ring.
Nice.
Yeah, love the Oura Ring. Love the Oura Ring. Now, most people will know that wearing a device to measure your sleep does not change your sleep. Potentially just makes you more anxious about your sleep. But the other device that I love that is a game changer for sleep, and as an FYI, I'm not on anyone's payroll for any devices mentioned, but are you familiar with the Chili Pad?
No. Oh, is this for body temperature or something?
Yeah. So it's a thin sheet that you put above your mattress, under your sheets, and it cools your bed down to, it's got a huge temperature range. But lowering my bed temperature under the covers made my heart rate variability go up significantly.
Really?
Better rest, better sleep, more deep sleep. It was a game changer for me. The combination of, it was very clear the nights that I have any alcohol, my heart rate and HRV and my sleep are horrible. And nights that I don't have any alcohol are much, much better. And when I combine no alcohol with my chili pad, I'm like Superman. I mean, I just feel unstoppable the next day.
Wow.
It really a game changer. But yeah, glucose meters and Oura rings, and I still wear my my Garmin triathlon watch. I find that's gives me all the data I need. There you go.
Yeah.
It's also fun. I once got hearing aids. I got hearing aids to test wearable tech, because not people with disability, as we define it today, who get replacement will be the first group of people that actually get augmented. So right now, imagine if my hearing aids can translate, Google Translate 27 languages. There are companies that have put the equivalent of a Fitbit and an Alexa in the hearing aid. And at that point, now it's a selective advantage. I was working with someone because there are these little parabolic mics, and you can get selectively better hearing. If you want to hear the stock tips at the, New York lunch, you can put your aids in and point your microphone. But, some other time we could talk about augmented eyes, ears, and, actually bionic limbs, prosthetic limbs.
Wow.
That is, that is the real future.
Look at you, Dr.
Crazy
Tucker,
stuff.
throwing down all of this, man. Like, so much good stuff to talk about. The one thing I for sure want to add to this, which I forgot to mention earlier, is like we touched on how obesity is a risk factor, but I heard you once comment on, for certain cancers, if you increase a BMI by X amount, you're increasing your risk about X amount. So I'd love us for just to comment on that briefly, if you don't mind.
Sure. So, that's a straightforward study I can send you from the American Cancer Society. I think also the Lancet Global Burden of Health makes a similar reference. And what they're saying is they're trying to document what the relative contribution, what are the number of cases of cancer. So maybe there's 100,000 cases of uterus cancer. And uterine cancer being very hormonally sensitive, they estimate what is the percentage of cases attributable to obesity, and also by degree of obesity. So that for every point, for different cancers, and I think uterus might be really high, like 13%, so that for every point above normal BMI, you had a 13% higher risk of uterus cancer. So, now what's important for the audience to know is these are all relative risk. So it doesn't mean that, if you're if it's 13% and you're 5 points above, you don't have a 65% lifetime risk of uterus cancer. You are 65% more likely than someone who is non-obese to be diagnosed with uterus cancer. But that's how that works. And it's, most of the time, it's, I can, we'll sort of pause here in a second. It's 13 types of cancer, obesity. And so, and lots of articles. 13 is the keyword in that search. You have to look into the article for the exact amounts, but for each of those, it's, thyroid cancer, breast cancer, liver cancer, gallbladder, stomach, pancreas, colon, uterus, ovaries, kidneys, myeloma, esophagus, all strongly related to obesity. And in different degrees, where uterus is a much higher risk, and other cancers are somewhat lower risk. But if you go to the ACS article for that, that's how it sort of explains it.
But
not all cancers obesity related. Leukemias and a lot of bone marrow disorders. Smoking is probably overwhelmingly tobacco related, not obesity related. But definitely breast cancer, GI cancers, female cancers, highly sensitive to increasing body mass index, obesity, and therefore, in my opinion, insulin.
Yeah. And this is the reason why I want to keep bringing this up is, we talk about 80-20, which is like one of my favorite topics in the world, by the way. We could jump on that one day my whole life is about 80-20, but 80-20 of prevention, right? From a lot of, for so many things is just, let's improve your metabolic health. And I'm just to give you context, I'm an intensivist. I don't see people I see them at the end of the disease courses, but we see it every day with patients that are poor metabolic health, doing worse, especially in light of COVID. I just really think that we need to keep screaming. And you've motivated me, actually, Stephen. We're going to have more of these personal stories, these patients that have gone through whatever it might be, whether it's cancer, whether it's been bypass surgery, whether it's their stroke, and reverse their illness or diabetes based on how they've approached this, because it's too important. We got to attack this full court press, my friend.
No, absolutely. And thinking 80-20, we have a kind of a list in the office that we're talking to patients about after conventional treatment, answering the question of what else can I do. One list is all the lifestyle interventions. Okay. And there's a lot. We call this the prevention menu. There's low carb or therapeutic carb restriction, periodic fasting, overnight fasting, sleep, mindfulness, weightlifting, HIIT, community, social, religion, and alcohol reduction. Okay. Then there's a separate list for vitamins and supplements. You name it, berberine, green tea extract, curcumin, resveratrol, vitamin C, blah, 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 blah. And then there's a list of repurposed medications like metformin, aspirin, beta blockers, statins, a bunch of, it's funny, we've been using mebendazole and doxycycline as anti-cancer agents for those patients who actually bring it to us. We don't always advocate it, but if they clue in, we're more than happy to offer it. And you saw with COVID, all those, helminthic agents, parasitic agents, of being of interest as possible. And chloroquine is on that list because they work through the same mechanism. They work through changing the energy. They target the mitochondria and change the energy metabolism. But to go back to the idea of 80-20, no one can do everything that's on my list. Right. And you have to pick what are those few items that you can do well, that if you can get 80% of this, you got it. Yeah. You're doing more than everybody else. Yeah. That's really the way I think about it. If you're already doing low carb and you're getting good sleep and going to the gym, I don't know that you need to take drugs. I don't know that you need to take all those supplements. It's a full-time job to follow the list. Yeah. I love it, man, because it give people hope, because you choose what you feel like you could accommodate and what suits your personality and your lifestyle. But there's a laundry list of options there, and it's personalized. It keeps coming back to it. It's personalized. Exactly. Stephen, this has been fantastic. That was a fast 90 minutes. Oh my God. This was glorious. I mean, I could hear the people listening. Quadcast Nation, I hear you. You're going to want more of Stephen Tucker after this one. This was tremendous. I learned a ton. I'm inspired after this. I want to keep pushing innovation. I want to keep pushing, improving metabolic health. So
Thank you very much for doing this. Where can people get a hold of you, Dr. Stephen Tucker?
So easiest is, email the office, go to the website, www.tuckermedical.com. That works. If they want to email me personally, just put STUCKER at tuckermedical.com, info@tucker.com, all of it. It all works, and if that doesn't work, then they should reach out to you and you'll find me.
100%. And buddy, thank you. This was incredible.
This was fun. Very good.
Podcast Nation, that was incredible. Knowledge being thrown left, right, center, tools to improve your metabolic health, reasons why, as cancer patients, this is important. Dr. Stephen Tucker, what a gamer. Follow us at Quadcast on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you see fit. Make sure to subscribe. Leave that 5-star rating. You're hearing us. We're changing the boogie. We need to increase the visibility of the show to continue to change that boogie. We really appreciate all the love. Loretto, fan number 1. I want to give an individual shout out to you. All the support, all these months. We love you. Resilience Conference. Don't forget to sign up. solvinghealthcare.ca/resilience. We really want to improve the overall well-being of all y'all that are struggling in these crazy times. Otherwise, guys, thanks so much for listening and stay safe.